I'm Siler Souters, and you're watching Clean Skies News. Right now, pressure is mounting on the U.S. Senate to pass climate legislation. This week alone, senators met with the president, several of his cabinet members, and also hundreds of economists and climate scientists. The latter are among the more than 2,000 members of the academic world who signed a letter to lawmakers making the case for immediate cuts in U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. On that list, 8 Nobel laureates, 11 MacArthur Genius Award winners, 32 members of the National Academy of Science, and also our guest right now, Dr. James Casey. He is professor of economics at Washington and Lee University, and he focuses on environmental issues there. Jim, good to have you with us today.
Thanks, Tyler. Thanks for having me.
Let's talk first of all about your meetings yesterday, specifically with your 2 senators in Virginia, Jim Webb, Mark Warner. What's your pitch to them as what I would term a climate economist?
Sure. You know, the big pitch to both of those offices yesterday, first of all, was to obviously thank them for the efforts that they're putting forward, but then to really try to drive home the point that a comprehensive energy and climate strategy is what is needed. Not a pure energy bill, not necessarily just a pure climate bill, but rather thinking very comprehensively about energy resources and carbon mitigation, and trying to think about how to creatively package those things so that it can work for the U.S. economy.
Well, let's talk about the reaction you got. You had said that Mark Warner's office was quite susceptible to what needs to be done. Jim Webb's perhaps not so much, and it sounds like he has economic concerns that a lot of Blue Dog Democrats have, and that is if we put a cap on carbon emissions into effect, this is going to come back and bite consumers at some point.
I think it was interesting that from Webb's office there was this general concern from Southside Virginia and Southwest Virginia, large constituencies there, that any sort of climate legislation would really hurt the coal industry. And that's a legitimate concern, I think, that responding to those constituents. And what we tried to help Senator Webb's office with was to understand that there's a shift in energy going on already. The movement towards renewables is already on the way. The movement towards low greenhouse gas emissions is on the way. And that really what Southside Virginia and Southwestern Virginia needs is comprehensive energy strategy to help that economy move out of a coal-based economy and into a more diverse portfolio of energy resources type of economy.
The Union of Concerned Scientists is one of the major groups backing this latest lobbying effort. And I want to read back to you one of your quotes, which was featured prominently in the brochure that UCS has for the lobbying effort this week. Climate scientists have done their job. Economists have done their job. Now it's time for the policymakers to do theirs. What do you mean by economists have done their job? What is the point that economists have made that leads toward a cap on carbon emissions and the need for such?
The evidence on climate change that the scientists have shown us, and that's sort of my jumping off point, there's excellent science out there to suggest that some pretty crazy things are going on with the climate, and it's related to the burning of fossil fuels. From an economic standpoint, the idea that market activities pass costs along to the environment, to other human beings who might not be involved in a particular market activity, that's an inefficiency. So in pure economic theory, the idea that I get to do something and pass the cost off on to you really leads to market inefficiencies. So from an economic viewpoint, what economists are saying is that in order to move us closer to what we call a perfectly competitive economy, we need to put a price on carbon. And I think that the global economic community has done a very good job of thinking about what that price might be and what the effects on different economies might be, and how not only does that put a price on carbon, but it provides an incentive for investment in other low GHG, greenhouse gas emission energy sources.
One of the scenarios you and I discussed from an economic standpoint, Jim, is what I would call unintentional economic consequences of doing business. And we're not just talking about greenhouse gas emissions. This is an economic factor in virtually every transaction that seems to take place.
Yeah, you know, it's a very old theory in economics called negative externalities. And yesterday over lunch, what we talked about was the idea that if you and I were sitting there smoking at the restaurant, we would be passing that secondhand smoke off to others in the room. How have we dealt with that in this country? We've banned smoking in many, many places because we see that external cost as being too great for the other participants at the restaurant, for example. So again, it's not just climate change. It's any form of cost that's passed on to somebody else. And this is pretty ancient theory for economics. Maybe something that's a little bit newer, I think, in the policy realm and to the general public, but it goes back several hundred years to thinking about how markets work, how they sometimes don't work, and externalities are something that economists have been talking about for a long time.
And now we'll find out who's listening in climate circles as well. Dr. James Casey is a professor of economics at Washington and Lee University in historic Lexington, Virginia. Jim, great to have you with us today.
Tyler, thank you so much.
Of course, and thank you for joining us as well. I'm Tyler Suiters, and you're watching Clean Skies News.